Bienvenidos a Mexico. Welcome to Mexico. It is my hope that with this presentation you will understand the struggle that many of our friends and neighbors have in this country obtaining quality health care. It helps to know a little bit about the country and its people. Mexico is the 14th largest country in the world by land mass and number 4 in population. They have several cultural subdivisions within the nation commonly identified as the northern, central, south, or southeastern Mexico. The extensive and desert-like north was only sparsely populated until the middle of the 20th century. It was traditionally housed only a small indigenous populations and is generally regarded as a frontier culture. Densely populated central and western Mexico is the cradle of the nation. Highly developed Indian cultures populated this region in pre-Columbian times, and it is also the heart of the colony of New Spain. Many prominent colonial cities are now major urban and industrial centers today. Southern Mexico has a tropical and subtropical climate with a little bit of rainforest. It is characterized by a strong indigenous heritage and is also the poorest part of the country. The word Mexico is derived from Mexica, the name of the indigenous group that settled in central Mexico in the early 14th century and as well known as the Aztecs. Mexicans have a rich, blended genetic history that includes Central Americans, Native Americans, Spanish, Africans, and a variety of Indian tribes. Skin tones range from very light to dark brown, and depending on genetic history, eye color can be blue, brown, and sometimes even green. Depending upon that genetic history, hair may be straight, black, or blonde. And those with black hair have the genetics that may be more linked to the indigenous, whereas the lighter skin and blonde hair resulted from Spanish background. 92.7% of all speak Spanish, and 6% speak Spanish as well as a native language. The most important of those native languages is the Nahuatl, and I apologize for my pronunciation. It is the primary language of more than 1 million Mexicans and is spoken by nearly 1/4 of all Native Americans in the country. It's followed by Maya at 14%, Mixteco, and Zapoteco, which is spoken about 7% of the Native Americans. There are other indigenous languages, but not more than 5% of the Mexico's Native Americans speak it. The most important icon of Mexico's national culture is the Virgin of Guadalupe, which illustrates the pervasive influence of Roman Catholicism in the national culture. She is viewed as the mother of all Mexicans. The dark-skinned Virgin is Mexicans' version of our Virgin Mary, and as such represents the national identity as a product of mixing the European and Mesoamerican religions and peoples. Her image was used in the struggle for independence against the Spanish. The religion of Mexico is mostly at 89% of Roman Catholicism, Protestant at 6%, and 5% other. Mexican society and culture, family values, and etiquette. The family is at the absolute center of all social structure. Outside of the major cities, families are still quite large. The extended family is important as a nuclear family and provides a sense of stability. Mexicans consider it their duty and responsibility to help family members. For example, they will help find employment or finance a house or even large purchases to even a wedding. Most Mexican families are extremely traditional, with the father being the head and the authority figure and the decision maker, and what he says goes. Mothers are greatly revered, but their role may be seen as secondary to that of the husband. Hierarchy. Mexicans emphasize hierarchical relationships. People respect authority, and they look to those above them for guidance and decision-making, and rank is extremely important and must always be treated with respect. To make it important to know where a person is in charge leads to an authoritarian approach, decision-making, and problem-solving. Mexicans are very aware of how each other fits into the hierarchy of family, friends, and in business. Excuse me. It would be very disrespectful to break the chain of hierarchy. As we all know, Mexican men are machismo, which literally means masculine, and there are different outward behaviors that display this machismo. For example, making remarks to a woman is a stereotypical sign of machismo and should never be seen as harassment. Mexican males believe that there should be nothing allowed to tarnish their image as a man. Etiquette and customs would be those beneficial for the healthcare to know these things, as the Mexicans are very respectful. When greeting one another, the women would pat each other on the right forearm or shoulder rather than shake hands. Men shake hands until they know someone, in which they would progress to the more traditional hug or backslapping. Wait until you're invited before using a Mexican's first name only. Some of their values, as I said before, hierarchy and family are at the top of that list. Hosting parties in their homes plays a great part of Mexican life, and making a visitor feel welcome and comfortable is a huge part of their value. Family units, as I said, are very large, traditional gender roles, and extensive family involvement into helping to assisting another one in day-to-day life. Education. The Mexican school system consists of basic, secondary, and higher education. The basic education from children 6 to 14 years old. Basic education includes preschool, which is free, to lower education. Federal, state, and local governments provide 93% of the basic education, while private schools provide about 7%. Preschool is optional and free, covering children aged between 3 and 5 years of age in 3 grades. Primary education lasts for 6 years and is compulsory, where the state provides free education from the age of 6. All children always to wear uniforms. The children attend classes between 4 to 4.5 hours a day. And there are different pathways in which this might happen, as far as the level where they might go, whether it be a general education, bilingual, bicultural education, community education. Lower secondary is 3 years and considered part of that basic education. But in order to get that, you have to have completed the 6 years of primary. This would be equivalent to our junior high. And then from there you go on to an upper secondary education, which is 3 years. Very comparable to our high school. At this point in time, at 14 years old, you should know where your life is going and how you want to proceed. So you may choose a general upper secondary school. You may choose to go to a technical professional education school or a technological school. From there, you go on to higher education, where we have universities which have licensing degrees, which are universities, technical institutes which offer 3-year programs in engineering and management, teacher training colleges which offer fields in education, and technological university offering 2-year programs for students in higher university technicians. Now moving on from our education, I was curious to know how a family would work and provide and how much it would cost. In January in 2014, the minimum wage for a 6-day week, up to 12 hours a day, was $5 a day. Not an hour, a day. I wonder, how does this play out into the everyday expenses? Well, eggs run about $1.79 a dozen. Milk runs $3.43 a gallon. Can you imagine having to spend most of your day working very hard just for a gallon of milk? Bread, $1.50. Rice at 35 cents a pound. Red meat, $3.13 a pound. Gasoline at $3.25 a gallon. And then what about rent and utilities? Well, for a small home of 950 square feet, whether it be 1 or 2 bedroom, would run about $70 a month, just a little short of that. Rent inside the city for a 3-bedroom home is $550. Inside the city is $692, and outside the city would be $550. 1 bedroom inside the city was $338, and outside of the city $310. So you can see that $5 a day certainly doesn't go very far, which is a reason why many families live in poverty and why many families live together in small spaces. So what does their diet consist of? Well, it's rich in complex carbohydrates, which are provided mainly corn and corn products. Use of tortillas is almost present at every meal. Beans, rice, bread also contain adequate amounts of protein in the form of beans and eggs and fish. also including pork and poultry. Chorizo is a spicy pork sausage that's served at breakfast with eggs. There are fruits and vegetables and tomatoes and squash, sweet potatoes, avocados, mangoes, pineapple, and papaya. The nutrients most likely to be inadequately represented are calcium, iron, vitamin A, and C. Foods are often very spicy, and spicy sausage will different from region of Mexico. But there is an extensive use of frying and cooking method, and the diet is high in fat. Coffee with large amounts of milk and sugar is often preferred, and atole, which is a milk-based beverage, flavored with milk chocolate, fruit, nuts, and thickened with a ground masa, which is a corn flour. Tap water is often unsafe in Mexico, and new immigrants here in the U.S. need to be reassured that tap water in the United States is safe to drink. Prepackaged food is not viewed very favorably, and a tortilleria, which is a tortilla factory, can be found almost in every neighborhood. Many Mexicans are lactose intolerant, and malnutrition is prevalent among Mexicans who are poor. So what are some of their traditional beliefs of health and illness? When someone is sick, it's because they are out of balance, having either too much heat or cold. And a correction of this balance by consumption of the right foods and herbs are what will bring this back into balance. If you have a hot food, you want to balance it with cold, and vice versa. That has nothing to do with the actual physical temperature of the food, but the definitions, this can be depending on the region of Mexico, is different from place to place. So you have to ask the person where they are from and how they see each food and how they see each illness, because illnesses are hot and cold, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. In traditional Mexican culture, it is believed that illnesses result from three causes: sin, imbalance, and witchcraft. It is thought that physical and mental illness is God's way of conveying unhappiness with a person, and therefore they need to external control over their illness. A person with an emotional illness may cause more physical illnesses, and their body is in the form of too much stress. Life is about balance, and an imbalance makes a person sick. The main traditional healer is known as curanderas, which is believed to get her power from God. Less used traditional healers include yerberos, or herbalists, and sobadores, masseuses. Curanderas view illnesses in a religious and social context and are used for more diseases that have a supernatural cause. Some of the more common beliefs in the illnesses are mal ojo, which is caused by a person with a very strong eye, and occurs when someone admires a child without touching them. The cure involves passing an egg over the body and placing it in a bowl under the child's pillow overnight, and if the egg is cooked in the morning, then the child has had a mal de ojo. Empacho is a form of stomach upset, which is believed to be caused by a bolus or an undigested food. This can be caused by eating the wrong foods at the wrong time of the day or eating undercooked foods. The most common treatment is massaging the stomach or back, or pinching the skin of the back and pulling it until it pops. Can we say ouch? Caída de molero means sunken fontanel and is believed to be caused by pulling a baby away from the breast or bottle too quickly, having the baby fall to the ground, or carrying a baby incorrectly. Symptoms include poor sucking ability, irritability, sunken eyes, vomiting, and diarrhea, and treatments would include pushing up on the baby's palate with a finger, holding the baby upside down over a pan of water, and slapping the bottoms of the feet, and apply a poultice to the fontanel. Susto, or fright sickness, is caused by a traumatic, frightening experience, and symptoms varied from lethargy to anxiety, depression, insomnia. And treatments would include herbal teas, covering the face with a cloth and sprinkling holy water, spitting a mouthful of water or alcohol in the patient's face unexpectedly. Malpuesto is when someone has used witchcraft to put a bad disease upon a person. The hex can be placed by a bruja, or a witch, or someone who knows about witchcraft. To cure these often involves prayers, massages, herbs, making crosses on the arms with olive oil and chili powder, and medicinal enemas. Envidia refers to envy, which is a person who is successful is kept quiet because others may envy him, thus resulting in illness due to good fortune. A spiritual healer is used to resolve the forms of witchcraft illnesses. Touching a child's head is believed to be a cause of an illness called caída de molera, which involves dehydration, vomiting, and fallen fontanelle that we've already discussed. It is very important that any medical personnel must be careful to explain whenever they're touching the head of a child. Mexicans have a variety of options when it comes to healthcare illnesses. In more urban cities, the Western-style healthcare is prevalent, of course, but at a cost, and there are private and state-run hospital clinics. Many times, pharmaceutical companies have their own clinics, and even political parties have them. Dr. Rodolfo Rodriguez Bernal states that even though he has been in training in the American style of medicine, he has found that many people, especially the older folk, would rather trust a combination of strong sense towards traditional style of healthcare. This means the use of herbs, nutrition, ointments, and for the elderly, many times a visit to the witch doctor and or priest. It is important to have a good relationship with your patients because they will seek you and trust you and seek your advice first. But if they do not trust you, they will seek a herbalist or spiritualist first, and many times this can make the situation worse as ointments and incantations will not heal in some infections and diseases. He finds that people who live in bigger cities will access a doctor quicker than those who live on the outskirts of the city or out of town. The people's ideas of how they take care of themselves is changing mostly in the urban areas. The newer generation do not take as much stock in the way their grandparents view it, but simply out of respect will consult their mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers before they consult anyone else. In rural areas, it is still much more of a traditional view that if you are sick, you have done something to imbalance your life, or done something wrong that God is not pleased with. So many times people will seek a priest for a cure. They're also very superstitious, and many of their illnesses are blamed on mal de ojo instead of things like poor hygiene or poor water. Medical personnel need to treat the right hot-cold disorder with the proper medicine to be effective, so it helps to know which side of the illness is on. Traditional medicine in Mexico is based on the Greek belief brought by the Spaniards in the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. A balance of these is believed to be needed for good health and is thought to cause either physical or emotional illness. These beliefs were brought over by the Spanish during the colonization and over the years combined with some already existing ones to form a belief that is based on the balance between hot and cold. Awareness in these beliefs is important when prescribing medicines since they are too categorized as hot or cold. For example, penicillin is considered hot medicine and given for a hot disease, such as fever, and is less likely that a patient will be compliant. For example, vitamin C, which is considered a cold food, and is therefore inappropriate for treatment of a cold disease like an upper respiratory infection. Cold diseases are ones that have invisible symptoms and include earache, arthritis, stomach cramps, and chest colds. Hot diseases have more visible symptoms and include empacho, cólico, stomach ulcers, fever, headache, and sore throat. Since these categories may vary depending on the patient and where they are from, it is best to just ask if there's any contradiction to taking a medicine according to their beliefs. As you know, the United States does not view healthcare in this way, and many of our doctors are quick to treat illnesses with a pill or therapy and do not take in consideration the more holistic style of healing. Mexico has a universal healthcare system, and the Constitution of Mexico grants everyone a right to health protection. And it comes in 3 different ways, the most popular being the Seguro Popular. Even those with unemployment or low income does not impede access to Seguro Popular and is based upon how much they make. Latins and Mexicans have a disproportionate higher rates of obesity and diabetes. Approximately 43% of Mexican Americans older than 20 years are obese, compared to 33% of non-Latin white population. Diabetes and hypertension are closely linked with obesity. 11.8% of the Latins older than 20 years have a type 2 diabetes. 13.3% of Mexican Americans, making it the foremost health issue in the population. A higher calorie diet, a more sedentary lifestyle, and genetic factors contribute to this problem because of the access to health care. Latinos with diabetes often are diagnosed later and have a greater risk of complications. So let me introduce you to my fictional character, Magdalena Hernandez. She's a 35-year-old mother, married, and has 2 children. Her husband works a lot to help pay for the bills, and she has a chronic digestive issues, but is afraid to get medical help because she is an undocumented alien. Her parents are both of Mayan descent. She knows very little English and relies on being able to read people's faces and the few signs that she can see in Spanish. I'd like you to take a look at how the American healthcare system would care for her versus Dr. Rodolfo Rodriguez Bernal, who is not fictional, but rather one I interviewed and lives in Monterrey, Mexico. First, let's look at the American side. With great fear, Magdalena arrives at the walk-in clinic in Omaha. She doesn't have any identity with her other than her driver's license from Mexico, a letter that was mailed to her from her mother, and a utility bill. She does have cash that she hopes will be enough to pay for the sliding income scale. She arrives at the front desk, asked to see the doctor. The secretary receptionist is able to speak a little bit of Spanish, and Magdalena a few words in broken English. She has both her young children with her, who are excited about running about and checking about the clinic's reception area. Tension is starting to run high on the secretary's part because she is annoyed at the children not being properly attended to by the mother. The secretary types in her name and her information in the documents that she can find and points her to sit down and asks her to sit down and wait. All the time she is smiling. Magdalena continues to see her children are in the waiting area and they're being a little unruly and loud and jumping off the chairs, and mother is trying to console them and to gather them up, and the children are messing with the magazines. The nurse opens the door and calls out, "Magdalena!" and points for her to come with her, proceeding to get her weight, her temp, height, and blood pressure, which is a little high. The nurse doesn't know any Spanish, but just continues to smile and does her job. She escorts Magdalena into a private room. Magdalena tries to tell the nurse her stomach hurts, and the nurse is trying to communicate with her, but is getting increasingly stressed about and making Magdalena feel worse. The doctor comes in, shakes her hand, pats the kids on the heads, and smiles. After realizing that there's some communication problems, he goes and gets the secretary, who Magdalena first saw, because she knows a little Spanish. Now remember, this is the secretary who's already had a tense situation at their first meeting. But she puts on her happy face, tries to calm the kids down by sitting them in a seat while stroking their cheeks and their head. And finally, using one of the kids' doll, Magdalena shows the doctor that she hurts in her stomach. Thinking this couldn't be much, the doctor prescribes her some Pepto-Bismol and a low dose of low blood pressure medicine, and asks her to come back in a week to be rechecked. Magdalena knows what a prescription is, but doesn't quite understand about being rechecked. She goes and fills the prescription and sees to take 1 teaspoon 3 times a day. She is confident that means to take 1 teaspoonful 3 times a day. But this compounds the problem, and it gives her diarrhea, which has not helped her. I gave the scenario to my friend, who is a doctor in Mexico, and asked him what he would do in his country. This is what followed. First, she would come into the clinic and be greeted by the secretary. There is no communication barrier, and she hands the secretary the appropriate documentation needed for her copay. Magdalena is able to tell her she's having issues again with her stomach, and the secretary reassures her the doctor will see her shortly. And then a nurse will take her back in an examining room where she'll get the medical information. Children are not a problem, as this is typical behavior for parenting in Mexicans. The nurse opens the door and calls out Mrs. or Senora Magdalena Hernandez. She explains to her each step and is able to get her vitals with no problem, almost ignoring the children as if they were not there. They are respectfully asked to follow her to the examining room and reassured the doctor would be in. Dr. Bernal comes in and greets her respectfully by calling her Senora Hernandez, making eye contact slightly, smiling and bowing his head to her. This is a sign of respect to her as the matriarch of her family. He proceeds to ask the children to sit down, which they do. Dr. Bernal never touches the children except for shaking their hand in introduction, which the children took great delight in. Magdalena then tells Dr. Bernal what the problem is. He is sure to ask her questions like, "What have you done to treat the situation? What medicines have you tried? What is your diet like? Have you been eating a lot of greasy food? What things have you done to calm yourself? What do you do for a living? Are you drinking a lot of caffeine or soda? Have you tried changing your diet and drinking any teas?" He asked her what her mother said since she was in charge of caring for her. Her mother sent her to a herbalist who suggested the tea. Magdalena tells the Dr. Bernal that she's been eating a lot of greasy food, and knowing her stomach condition is a hot issue, he tells her that she needs to change her diet, continue to drink tea, spend the time calming herself down and take time for herself, and give her a prescription given to her right then and there at the clinic. He tells her to eat more papaya, which is a natural healing for the stomach and digestive issues. He also asks for a sample to find out that she has amoebas and tells her not to eat any carbs or sugars of any kind for 7 days. This starves the amoebas and will kill them, and her body will flush them out of her system, and improving her digestive system. He has to repeat back to him what she understands, and if she has any questions. She offers a handshake, and she thanks him, and she goes on her way. Dr. Bernal asks if there's anything else he can do for the children or anyone else in the family, to which she says no and thanks him again. A week later, Dr. Bernal calls on the phone to check up on her and her family. She is much better and is thanking him. He has told me that there are many times when he has gone to do a home visit, especially concerning difficult cases, in order to check up on his patients. The difference in the two cases are extreme. An American case did everything to create more stress and offend the mother by touching the children's head and face without any medical reason, and even shaking hands without knowing who Magdalena was. Even the secretary nurse showed great disrespect for her by calling her and shouting out her name, Magdalena, instead of addressing her properly. The language was a barrier. There was a need for an interpreter, at least a computer program that would have helped to translate what Magdalena was wanting. On the Mexican side, Magdalena was treated with respect, calling her by her surname, showing respect and explaining what was going on. Doctor showing respect first meeting during the whole consultation. Shows her courtesy about her kids, never touching them on the head, which is extremely disrespectful, and according to folklore can cause more health issues. According to Dr. Bernal, in Monterrey, which is the biggest city in Mexico, people are apt to go to the doctor more readily before seeking a herbalist or other medical advice, simply because there are more state clinics available. But farther out of the city you go, the less available of clinics and doctors, and the more reliant people become on home remedies. The problem exists that many times there are more desert areas and more serious problems like tuberculosis, pneumonia, and severe bronchitis, poor water health, and conditions like dysentery, typhoid, and gastrointestinal issues that arise, sometimes fatal. There are pharmaceutical companies that hire doctors to make trips out to some of those areas once a month. Even into the hidden away Native Mexican Indian tribes will allow a medical doctor or nurse as long as they work with the herbalist or the priest. For Mexico and for Mexicans, healthy living is harmony with family, socially, emotionally, and physically. And it's best for the medical field to treat all of these. It's about relationship of trust, loyalty, and tradition. There are several reasons why Latin Americans will dread going to the doctor. According to The Atlantic, states that over half of the Latin population never see a doctor in a year, and when they do, they start to feel better, they quit taking the medicine. 1/4 of Latin Americans are undocumented and therefore unable to sign up for Medicaid, and they will not take the chance of information being passed to immigration. Language is a barrier, and they simply do not like to be put in situations where they feel embarrassed or uncomfortable. They are a prideful people. They'd rather trust home remedies than have a medical expense. Respect is something that the Mexican people highly value, no matter what your income or professional status may be. So in conclusion, whether you agree with it or not, our borders are accepting immigrants from all over the world, with a high majority of them from our neighboring country, Mexico, and even further south. As poverty and even given the drug cartel climbing into power like never before, people are fleeing to America in hopes to be able to live in safety and provide for themselves and their children. There's an old saying that says, walk a mile in someone's shoes before you criticize anyone else's. It's a good thing to think about. It would be impossible for our country to have language in every language available, but there is a need to have some sort of program. We've lost the personal touch in our healthcare system, and we do not have the level of respect that many other countries hold. Mexicans and Latins are growing in our country. This is a good thing that many of the children are learning English fast and have adapted their culture to more Americanism. This creates another dilemma of having to raise a family of two cultures, but that's another issue. Our medical field needs to spend some time bringing cultural training to medical staff, as this is vital. Our own medical ways of doing things have changed to trying to bring in more prevention. If our medical field would start with just even showing more respect to open the door, many Mexicans would be less leery of receiving medical attention. Mexicans run on relationship, where in America we run on time and money. If doctors and nurses could start and establish relationships on Mexican terms by showing great amount of respect, This would greatly impact the Latin community and stop the spread of illnesses and revolve into more healthy living. Thank you for your time. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. Bienvenidos a Mexico. Welcome to Mexico. It is my hope that with this presentation you will understand the struggle that many of our friends and neighbors have